Wir gehen jetzt nach Stockholm zu Staffan Lindberg, Professor für Politikwissenschaft und der Hauptautor dieser Demokratiestudie. Guten Abend, Herr Professor.
Good evening.
Professor Lindberg, according to your study, never before have so many countries been moving towards autocracy at the same time. You even say the situation is worse than it was in the 1930s. Is it truly that dramatic?
Yes, it is in that sense. There are, in the last few years, 45 to 50 countries autocratizing at the same time. And that's a historical record. It's never been that many. It's also a greater share of the world population living in those countries autocratizing at the same time. And it's never been that high. And this wave of autocratization that the world is going through, it started 25 years ago to build up and has now been accelerating. If you think about it, the 1930s, if we're generous, were 15 years. So it's also longer than before.
What are the most significant indicators that a country is becoming less democratic and more autocratic?
The most common is when a country, a democracy starts to autocratize and become less democratic, that freedom of the press and freedom of expression more generally are being undermined. The governments try to censor the media, harass journalists, get the media to exercise some self-censorship. That's very often an early part of the process.
But if I understand your criteria correctly, you already consider it a restriction of free speech and of democracy when a state introduces new laws against online hate speech, for example. Others might see that as a strengthening of democracy.
Yeah, I don't know where you picked that from, because it really depends if that law is politically targeting a particular group, which can happen. But in general, hate speech, outlawing hate speech is an accepted part of democracy.
Do you have an explanation for this global anti-democratic wave?
Several. It's, as always, complex. But let me say this. It's very closely related to the increasing spread of disinformation, lies, conspiracy theories that are used to build up extreme polarization. And then over these past 25 years, the parties and leaders that undermine democracy and do away with it are almost exclusively far-right, nationalist, reactionary, and anti-liberal. And that's just what the research shows. It's very clear. It's not an opinion.
Your report has a very long chapter on the United States under Donald Trump. And in an interview with The Guardian, you said, I quote, "It should be obvious by now that Trump is aiming for dictatorship." That is quite a strong statement. What makes you say that?
Well, I think you don't have to use my words. You can use Trump's own words. In an interview recently with New York Times, he said that the only constraints on his power and exercise of power is his own morality. Not laws, not constitution, that's the language of at least a wannabe dictator, somebody who sees himself as a legitimate autocratic ruler.
You say that Trump is moving the US towards autocracy faster than Viktor Orban did in Hungary and Erdogan did in Turkey. How exactly is he doing that?
Yeah, it was prepared. So much like Orban in Hungary, like he started the autocratization the second time he came into power. Now, Trump was there the first time, made many mistakes, have learned from them, he and his team, and also then used the 4 years to prepare for this coming into power. And then they have just, at an incredible speed, taken over and concentrated power in the presidency, undermining courts, ignoring courts. There are rulings of court contempt, taking over power from the legislature, intimidating the media, intimidating academia, law firms, and so on. And, you have paramilitary forces and military on the streets in American cities going after and suppressing protests, peaceful protests. It's gone very, very fast.
For a very long time, the US has been the most important liberal democracy on earth and a global role model of checks and balances. Why does this system of checks and balances obviously no longer work?
So, again, Trump and his accomplices managed to take over the Republican Party and make it into a almost Trump sect or the MAGA movement. And there are almost no real sort of normal Republicans left. And that is enabling Trump to do what he's doing. And, the amount of illegality of that regime in the U.S. now is astounding. There are over 600 court cases against the Trump regime, a host of them involving breaking the Constitution. The Supreme Court has already ruled that he broke the Constitution once, and other courts have ruled on other constitutional issues. And then he ignores it or goes around it.
In some interviews, you had interesting numbers about Trump's executive orders. Why are they so important?
Because executive orders by the president in the United States is a form of legislation. And Trump has issued 225 of those in the last year only. Meanwhile, Congress, the real lawmaker, enacted 49 bills. And most of them are on tiny issues, whereas Trump's presidential executive orders are on major issues that affect the whole of the United States and society and the world around us, as we know from the tariffs. So it's an instrument for the Trump administration and Trump himself to effectively take legislative power over from the legislature and put it in the presidency. And now the Supreme Court, with a few rulings in the fall, legitimized some of that. And that's a transfer of power, concentration of power into one person, which is per definition autocracy.
If I understand you correctly, you have not yet classified the United States as an autocracy only because the most recent national elections in 2024 under President Joe Biden were still free and fair. Now, there will be congressional elections in November this year. Do you expect them to be free and fair as well?
Well, I would hope so, but I have my doubts. I think President Trump has issued, again, an executive order requiring all the states to submit their voter registration rolls for review by the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice. And they deciding who can vote. He's also issued then stronger requirements on mail-in voting and ID laws that also suppresses the vote. And then you have these paramilitary troops that already are on the streets that could be employed. It's not unthinkable. And then finally, even if, let's say, the Democratic Party win the majority of the seats, nonetheless, Trump doesn't have a track record of accepting losing elections.
If the Republican Party of Donald Trump were to lose the midterm elections in November, do you think he will accept the result?
I think there's a big question mark to whether he will accept the result and whether the MAGA movement and the MAGA people in Congress will accept it. Trump never accepted the loss of the 2020 election. He still claims that he won. with not a shred of evidence. And he has a track record of trying to get votes falsified in the 2020 election in order to come out as a winner. And the chair of the Federal Election Commission that Trump has appointed, she is one of the most well-known election 2020 deniers. So I would not, at least not take it for a given that they will accept to lose.
Are there any developments in your global report that gives you a reason for hope?
Well, the Seychelles are doing well.
Okay, apart from that?
Yeah, so we have a few countries that have made what we call U-turns. They stopped autocratization and turned around. Brazil is a recent example where a coalition of 9 parties behind Lula threw out Bolsonaro, and he eventually got prosecuted and is in jail. You also have Poland as another example in Europe then that also turned things around with Donald Tusk and another coalition. So there are some hopes there with countries being able to stop this.
In Hungary, an autocrat could be potentially voted out of office in April after 16 years in powers. How significant would that be?
Oh, that would be tremendous. And again, we don't know to what extent Viktor Orban and his clientele around him will accept to lose an election. We're yet to see that. But if so happens, and if he would eventually step down and the Fidesz party accept to be in the opposition again, that would be a tremendous development.
Professor Lindbeck, thanks so much for your time, and all the best to Stockholm.
Thanks for having me.